Welcome to the FRCL Weekly Call. We're a group of distribution leads who get together regularly to discuss works in progress, share ideas, and create opportunities for cross-distro collaboration.
Hey everybody, it's July 15th. We are Fedora RHEL CentOS leads, and today our agendaless meeting is turning into an agenda meeting for the FRCL Cloud SIG because David Duncan is no longer part of AWS. And we want to talk about what that means for disambiguating and clarifying ownership of images and whatnot. So, David, what's
shaking? Yeah, so officially on July 10th, I finished my last day at Amazon, and nothing terrible, no disconnection here. Like still have many friends and feel comfortable saying that I'm happy with Amazon and AWS as a company, and my experience has been super positive all the way down to the very last minute. That does leave us in a position where previously I was building in the images for both CentOS and Fedora for the AWS marketplace, and those were falling under an internal umbrella that I no longer have. So the goal here is to determine how we can move towards making sure we can continue to provide images that are available through the marketplace.
Okay, so this is a thing that you and I talked about on a number of occasions, like what happens in this scenario? And it's like, are we doomed? Does all AWS suddenly vanish from the community space? Like, I think that's the thing everyone's afraid of.
Yeah, no, we still have champions internally, and I'm not gonna put a finger on anyone specifically, but the accounts that we are using still have the same owners. There was no transition of ownership in those accounts because they're team owned and managed by a general team. But then there are also people who are practically in a practical position within the scope of engineering, who are interested in making sure that those persist, because obviously Fedora is a very important foundation for the work that they are doing within the Amazon Linux team, and that is continuing. That is an ongoing relationship, and there is always a consistency in that connection and communication. So that remains open, and we've seen many people like Frederick Lafava, who has been an integral part of the community these days, and that footprint has been increasing. So I'm excited to say that I feel like we're stronger than ever, even though I'm not there.
Okay, and I assume you're going to stick around in the CentOS board and still be awesome in the community space.
I have even more time to do that now, right? Because I have plenty of runway, and I'm not looking. I wasn't looking to decrease my footprint in the community. I was looking to increase it, and it has been nothing but great for me to be a part of it, be a part of it all. And what can I say? These are my friends.
Yeah. Okay. So from a FRCL perspective, FRCL, from a FRCL perspective, then I think it's just like an access control question. Like, oh, we gotta change some owners and do stuff. Like,
oh, we actually don't. No, nothing changes for us, right? So from the internal perspective so I'm going to talk about this from the AWS account perspective. The AWS accounts have always been owned by internal teams at Amazon, right? So, well, I'm sorry, the actual account is owned by by Red Hat, right? Effectively, right? And then that account comes under a payer account that is managed by an AWS team. So the only thing that we need to make sure is that, we're always associated with that account. And if we're disconnected from that account, that's a big deal, right? So our monitoring should include making sure that we know exactly how these accounts are associated. So to give you an example, there's another distribution that had a significant series of layoffs that prevented them. They laid off an entire organization that was responsible for building their images, and their account was reviewed, and there was an identification that it was attached to another account. They didn't know what that account was, so they just detached it, and then they became responsible for their own AWS bill. Right. I got that untangled, but it was it took months, right? It took months for us to figure out how to do that, and we've done that with one CentOS account here. We had one CentOS account that was not associated with the original payer account internal to Amazon, and we had to figure out what to do, and we did, right? So I'm not frightened by the possibility, but I am also of the mind that we need to have more alerts and management to identify where we stand exactly at every moment, right? And just with using the basic observability tools that we have already.
Yeah.
And it would be good. Like, there's some things that we can do that now that I have time, right? I've always planned to do that would allow us to provide some more cost reporting, some more threat detection on the system that we can then use to report back to and establish some basic community tenants, so that we can help the rest of the communities who are also in this boat take on those practices and make sure that we're safeguarding and creating security, the right kind of security profile for all of us. So I'm looking forward to being a part of that, right? Being able to do it on a regular basis instead of just when I have absolute, when I can scrape together the time.
I think we all win with you having more time, David. So is there anything that we in Fedora or CentOS infrastructure should be doing right now because of this change?
Well, so Kevin and I mean, one of the wonderful things that I love about Flock is it gives me an opportunity to connect with everybody that effectively as many people as I can possibly get together, right? And so Flock was a great opportunity to spend some time with Kevin and talk about the future and what we wanted to do in terms of integrations and safeguards. So this is something that has been on the radar and just waiting for an infrastructure volunteer who had enough time to get deep into it. And now I think I am that man.
Man, if only Pesco elections were next week. All right. So do people have questions or comments? Like, I think everyone's probably a little verklempt. Change.
I'm just wondering if we need to invite someone from AWS into this call now, since it's not David anymore.
Well, David was super here as an AWS person, so that wasn't
that's true.
The reason he's here has basically nothing to do with him working at AWS.
Right, he's here as a CentOS board member.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
from a day-to-day basis, AWS doesn't actually matter. They don't, aside from David, most of them don't participate or engage in Fedora or CentOS cloud operations or resourcing or contributions or really anything.
So Jeff is at Guadic right now, so I'll just venture one of the things he's postulated. So right now we have CentOS is a major downstream for Fedora effectively, right? But there's also an Amazon Linux, there's also an Azure Linux, they're also basically downstreams of Fedora. I would think if we wanted to change like the baseline invites, that's probably where I would target, right? Is the people that are downstream that we have like common cause with, because like as the owner of the invite, David's totally here because he's a CentOS board member and he didn't even ask for it. It's just like, board members, you were invited. I mean, if he had asked, I would have invited him anyway. I mean, that's basically true for anybody in any of the communities, but especially for David. So like related topic, should we be courting the relationship with Amazon Linux people, Azure Linux people? Should we like get Jim Perrin in here if we can? Just for the fun, if nothing else. Yakov.
I've always been a little curious as if to some of these enterprise-ish downstreams aren't somehow benefiting from ELN. I think they would, but I haven't heard a peep from them, so I have no idea what's going on there. Like I know Amazon Linux isn't a clone of RHEL, so they're not necessarily going off of CentOS, they're going off of Fedora, but I would think that somehow ELN may be a route to that might be better than starting from scratch. I'm kind of curious as to why I haven't heard a thing about it from them, but it would be interesting. I'd be curious to see if there's things that would benefit them, or if they are even looking at that or whatever it is.
Neil, go ahead.
So currently they don't pay any attention to ELN, but that wasn't what I was going to say anything about. So I'm going to say the thing I actually was going to say, which is I don't think that this needs to get any bigger than it already is. If we're going to start talking about engaging with downstreams more broadly, we probably need another vehicle for this, which is optimized for that. Like, honestly, the Azure and Amazon Linux downstreams are probably the least important ones for us to engage with, because they already are not super engaged with us at the Fedora level yet. What we probably need to be courting more are the people that actively work with Fedora or actively connecting their marketing to Fedora in that sense. And we need to have a dedicated space for that creates connective tissue for those that wish to participate in that space. And maybe that does expand to also include Amazon and Azure Linux as they increase their participation within the project. But this space principally exists because there's a problem between Red Hat and the community. And so this is supposed to fix that problem. Expanding the scope and adding more people just kind of makes this harder and harder for it to function. It's already kind of difficult for this thing to function as it currently stands.
That's true. This meeting isn't big enough for the both of us, Neil. No, you're totally right. I have more comments though. David, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I feel like, and especially this year, right? There's been a significant, there's been a break in the active participation from multiple angles, right? I mean, you mentioned Jim, but Jeremy is a perfect example of someone who has rolled up his sleeves and done a lot of work around infrastructure, and I can't stress enough that I think that those these are great examples for us to have and wonderful people to have in the community, and that is what I would love to see. I would love to see more people in the community participating in that way. But I kind of agree with Neil, is that it was never about trying to create a larger system in this meeting. But I do think that we should probably find that forum 100%.
So as a longtime technical project manager, my goal in life is to shut this meeting down, because it is a Band-Aid. It is a Band-Aid to a problem that Neil articulated fairly well, which is that we don't talk across distributions. And just because as Red Hat has gotten more organized in its engineering activities, we have become less verbose about the things that we are doing because we have structure now, and that structure is invisible, and that leads to an accidental sort of proprietary posture that we want to, that is like the antithesis of what we're trying to accomplish here. So like the FRCL call is a band-aid for a problem, and to the extent that we can solve that problem organically and like generalize that problem to other downstreams, like that is a thing that I think we all want to support. So if Fedora has more interactivity with its downstreams, and that happens inside the confines of the Fedora community and space, like I think that's a win. That's because this is a forced thing that we're doing here, and it is therefore it's not as optimal. It's not as open as we'd like. So like I'm saying, we could bring them in here, but you know, if that was suboptimal, because it totally is, we could also do that further upstream. That could originate inside FESCO or the council, or maybe there needs to be another body of like the group of downstreams or something along those lines. Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, you said it as I raised my hand. If we need to talk with the downstreams, I think that needs to be a separate meeting, because there's enough of them that it would take a whole meeting. One thing that may be good is to plan to have an interaction, and because I'm really a fan of in-person interactions like David is, maybe we plan on something for that at Connect. Maybe we plan for something at Flock, and we plan on it far enough in advance that people can make sure it's on their schedule and their travel plans. Doing an online meeting isn't necessarily bad, but I think you'll get more honesty in a room. That's it for me.
Yeah, I had a comment that is similar. I think that we want to have communication lines open with our downstreams, and the more we have of those, the better for us as a project. I don't know, I thought that the talks that we had at Flock were very useful, and I think we should extend an explicit invitation to various downstreams to deliver status updates at Flock. Maybe, half an hour, what you are doing, what are your pain points, what would you like to see in the future. I think we should just make this like a constant theme for every Flock, so that we just know more about the downstreams.
Yeah, you can go first.
On a slight tangent to this, I will say this. For example, some of the work that I've done with Neil about background, like desktop background handling, and how to do that in a way that's OS agnostic, in other words, so that you get your default. When you install KDE, for instance, on Apple, you used to get a Fedora background, and we really wanted to have the CentOS background on CentOS and the RHEL background on RHEL. We did a lot of things to make that happen in 10.2. All our downstreams could benefit for that, but they need to know how, and I wouldn't even, I could make a blog post, I guess, but I don't know if anyone would see it. I don't know, I wouldn't know how to get that across to people so they can know, hey, you can, if you do these things, then and we do some things on our end in Fedora to make you respect these rules, then your backgrounds will show up by default even when using our packages. That kind of thing. I don't know where the forum for that exists. I'm not saying this should be here, but I'm just think that's the kind of thing that I would be curious as to how I even go about that.
Okay. One thing I was going to venture was actually a follow-up on the thing you said earlier, Yakov, which was ELN and are people using it? Well, clearly RHEL is using it, and it's really there for RHEL's benefit. But one of the things that I would hope to see as a result of a conversation with downstreams is, hey, is the thing that Fedora is doing for RHEL with ELN the kind of thing that other downstreams would find beneficial? Like, how can we bring downstreams a little closer upstream? How can we make you first-class citizens? Is the kind of thing, and would that be useful? Would that be nice? Is the sort of thing that I would want to be able to discuss. David, go ahead. For some reason, Yakov's hand doesn't go down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. So I did want to point out that that there were both there were talks from both Microsoft and AWS engineers at Block this year to talk about their use of Fedora within that context. So we are getting some active participation in the community from these groups who are using Fedora as an upstream. Yeah, I think we all do.
For the recording, comment in the chat. I want more, even more. All right, so Amy's suggestion was, let's meet at Connect. I don't know how many people are going to go to Connect, but it seems like the kind of thing worth socializing and engaging in, like in that discussion. So, like we're talking, I think, about Azure and Amazon Linux because we came out of David's path change, but to Neil's point, there are other downstreams that are important to Fedora that we would want to engage with as well. So, like, what is a good next step here? Like, how do we go from, hey, this seems like a jolly good idea, to, hey, let's talk to the people that actually we would want to be doing this thing with or socializing with? Like, is this something that leads here can follow up on, or like, what do you think? Who would you even include? Like Bazite, Bluefin, Alma?
Well, I guess I should raise my hand. Hand raised. Okay. I think there are definitely known downstreams. So we start with them. Because we can't start with the ones we're not quite sure about, whether they're Fedora downstreams or CentOS downstream. If someone's building their own little thing on the side that we have no clue about, we can't invite them. But if we do this and it's successful, maybe those unknowns will also step up and say, hey, I've been building this OS for Raspberry Pi off of what y'all are doing. And then we go, hey, why don't you join us next year? So I think we start with the known because that's easy. And then we invite, then hopefully the unknowns will pop in. David?
I like Neil's idea of having a track, sort of a defined track for Flock that includes that downstream aspect.
I think there is one, and maybe it's just not advertised enough because there is the Friends track. So it does exist. It just may need more promotion.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, yeah. So that's what Sean's saying in the notes right here. It said in the chat is that's what the CentOS and Friends was, right? So appreciate that. On. So yeah, we do have that track. Yeah. We should. I think you're right, Amy. We should definitely celebrate it. And it also brings us in an avenue for sponsorship as well for the conferences, and I think that's super beneficial.
Okay, so not to create a Thunderdome cage match or anything, but is it the case that CentOS, as like the leading downstream of Fedora, is the place for it to be bringing all the other downstreams together, or is this a Fedora thing that CentOS has been doing longest and best?
Well, my understanding is that like Amazon is not a downstream of RHEL or CentOS. That they do something similar on their own schedule and their own package sets. So I don't know that CentOS would necessarily make sense. They're not technically Amazon Linux upstream, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, but there's something to be said for uniting the tribes, right?
But it's not a uniting. It's probably putting them in the wrong group. So you're introducing people who are not part of the same tribe into that tribe and making them have to duke out for influence, which is probably going to go exactly the way that it sounds. So, yeah. I mean, I'd say we should just add another data flock and then make sure that we have room for all these different groups specifically to talk, because I mean, this year at Flock, there wasn't a lot of room for that sort of thing. The fact that there was a couple that squeezed in, I think, was incidental to the fact that it wasn't deliberate.
David.
So I just wanted to verify for Yakov that it is, you are exactly right, that the Amazon Linux vision is as a fork of a fork of Fedora at a given time, and then move from there. It is not a CentOS experience. That does not stop the problems that any downstream of Fedora from being extremely common, right? And some of the changes that they need are going to land for sure in Fedora, but most of them, regardless of whether they are derivative of CentOS or Fedora, either one, are going to have changes that land in Fedora. So, I mean, I think that's a, however we connect them together, the end result is going to be one that feeds back into the Fedora community, or should be.
Yeah. In the chat, there's kind of a sidebar on Flock last year, but I'm thinking about Flock next year. So, Justin, I know probably nothing is decided at this point, but can you kind of comment on expectations for next year so far? It's like we have Meet Your FESCO. Should we have a Meet Your Downstreams thing? Like, what's happening right now in Flock planning?
We have our retrospective tomorrow, so I expect that we'll have more maybe in the next FRCL call that we could share. But right now, I think it's just too early. Like we just had the survey close last week. We're just starting to process some of the data and responses from it. And like I've said many, many times, the survey feedback is a huge driver in what decisions we actually take. So right now, the focus is just trying to process that. We do have an article that's hopefully going to come out next week with an early snapshot of some of the metrics and data. But later this summer, I'm hoping that we can have a more detailed Fedora Council town hall like we did last year after Flock to go into the data a little bit more deeply. So not much to comment and say right now because we're still so early and we haven't even done our retrospective as a team yet. But again, hopefully more to come in the next few weeks as we try to get people back from their summer vacations and trying to coordinate across 6 different time zones. So hopefully more to come in time.
Okay, cool. Like maybe that's the thing we talk about in August after the processes are unfurled in the Fedora space. Okay. And just to Neil's point, I would think that if you put multiple downstreams together, they wouldn't be fighting for influence. They would be uniting for greater influence. Like might just be a perspective approach problem or posture, but like if a bunch of downstreams all agree that Fedora could be doing something differently that would be beneficial to them, I think we'd be more likely to listen to that as a leadership body. Is like, oh, we're on the fence on what to do here. One of these two things is really great for our downstreams. One of these is really bad for our downstreams. Like we choose the thing that's good for downstream, right? But how do we know that if we aren't talking to our downstreams? Which brings us back to why we're having this call, which is a band-aid for not having these conversations otherwise.
So, I mean, I do feel like, one of the things that has been very complicated for some of those newer downstreams to experience and put into practice is a change proposal. So a lot of them want to have more, less overt first experiences with the changes that they want to build in, and so they want to have more of a stronger sense of guaranteed success before they put the change proposal in, and I know that's a complication that no one could ever deliver with 100% certainty, but it is something that I see fairly frequently, is that even though there's an understanding that they're doing something that they think is beneficial, it doesn't necessarily turn out to be the thing that could be a thing that can be adopted. And so the no is more severe than it maybe could be. And Jeff is not here to defend his sandbox idea, but there is some call for a way where we can create some flexibility in that discussion that is not necessarily putting people in a position to say that they have good, that their ideas are representing the ideas of their company, right? For example, at the same time, we need time and understanding to get used to saying yes to ideas like that.
Yeah, I think the thing about sandboxes is that they are big as constructed, and so they feel more applicable to a commercial participation where it's not just one person with an idea and time to spend. It's feels a lot easier to pursue that when you have more people dedicated or fungible even. So I guess that does kind of split it in two, right? There's the downstreams that are downstreams because they've got a business interest, and there's the downstreams that are downstreams because they're doing a fun thing and they want to share it. Often those look more like remixes. A little bit of a spectrum there. Neil.
I think from a Fedora point of view, I'm less interested in the commercial downstreams than I am in the ones that are doing things for fun and doing interesting stuff. Sometimes those intersect, but like a lot of the quote unquote commercial downstreams are so boring in state and are not particularly adventurous that there isn't much to talk about. And I'm saying this as like, for 2 years, I directly engaged with Amazon Linux, and David was there with it. Like we had for 2 years a bi-weekly sync up with Amazon Linux to engage and figure out points of collaboration, whatever. And what it essentially boiled down to was there was nothing to discuss, there was nothing to collaborate on, because they really weren't interested in driving anything. From their perspective, they were very inward focused, and maybe that will change over time, and they're going to drive more interesting, exciting stuff or whatever. But like, I don't really care whether they're commercial or not. I care whether they drive interest. They want to drive interesting things or want to create new ideas or participate in the community. So like, if you are a downstream that primarily exists by consuming and forking all the packages and doing whatever, I don't care about you from a Fedora point of view. And because ultimately you don't care about me either. So if there is something to do where both of us are working together in some way, okay, then that's fun. And what I've observed is that a lot of the community-centric remixes and those sorts of downstreams are a lot more willing to do that than the commercial ones. That's not always holding to be true, but it has been my experience over the past 5 years of dealing with both commercial and non-commercial downstreams of Fedora.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I mean, I'm like, there are some things that and these are open, not something that's happening behind closed doors. But there were some ideas around that Frederick Lefebvre was presenting at Flock around how they use the spec file and what their specific requirements are for building out the spec file. And I thought, and I still think that there is some collaborative understanding that it was like a perfect intersect with the work that Neil and Michelle Lynn have been doing on composable spec, and so there was a lot of that effort there that I thought was important, because it lands this more common conversation in the community space, but it's hard to have out in the open just generally, and so there's lots of things that I feel like we're doing kind of on the fringe here that are not just a commercial idea. They're like they're holistic ways of changing the way that we deal with composability. I think we need that. I'm sorry, just quick. I'll just say I think we need that, in the context of Hummingbird and a lot of other things that are coming down the pipeline that don't necessarily just immediately match up with what it is that we're doing in this space, one-to-one. And we know that there's more of that coming. Okay, now shut up.
Thanks, David. Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm assuming you intentionally bumped me in front of you, Brendan, because I think your hand was up first.
That's the thing I do.
Okay. So to bring some of the conversations that are going on in the chat just to the audio, Sean had said, well, would there be a conflict of the people who would be interested in a Downstreams track with the Mentor Summit? There's going to be some, like myself. If I'm in attendance, I would probably go to both, but I would probably in this case concentrate on the Downstreams one. So that would be something that we could do at Flock. My main mention of Connect earlier was just because Connect falls before Flock, and if we have a really good idea, I don't want to wait another year. But then we also had the idea of, Neil mentioned he doesn't care about the commercial. Well, but Amazon and Microsoft are more of the commercial. And one place they attend is Red Hat Summit. So my thought was, hey, maybe we could do a dinner. And then Sean mentioned, well, maybe they could also talk at Community Day. And then we could have a dinner as icing on top of the cake. So, to some degree with work travel the way it is, trying to get the right people together where they already are, I think is a good idea. So maybe we do invite Microsoft and AWS and anyone else who's doing a more commercial downstream to submit to Community Day, and hey, let's have a dinner afterwards. For those who are more open source related, the Downstream Day is a good place for them. And Neil, I had mentioned earlier, the ones we don't know, maybe after they saw what was going on, reaching out to us to be included in the future. So I wasn't totally like leaving out those hobbyists, but we don't know about them. We run into this with OKD all the time. We have no clue who all is using OKD until they come up to us and say, hey, I'm using OKD. So this was my way of finding those people. Go ahead, Neil.
My thing is, I don't care about them just because they're commercial downstreams. That is not interesting to me. And my interest lies in, are they participatory and collaborative? And again, prior evidence is that they aren't. Now, if that changes, then my opinion of my interest in them changes too, right? This is, from my point of view, whether they're commercial or hobbyist or something in between, just straight up doesn't matter to me if they aren't at least interested and willing to collaborate and engage in the Fedora project itself. If they're not doing that part, then I'm not going to go around trying to, grab their necks by the scruff of their necks and pull them into the space. is not worth it. It doesn't work out. Like you can't make them drink.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Neil. We have downstreams that we never hear from because we are meeting their needs. And the only time they will show up is when we stop doing that or we contemplate not doing that. We do S390 in Fedora. IBM uses that. It's very important to them. You do not hear from them very often because the fact that we do S390 in Fedora is the thing that they actually need to do all their development on top of. And if you are doing a thing that's not commercial, if you're doing it in the community space, you're probably going to hear from them more because it's visible. Like it's not a commercial interest. It's all taking place in the open source world. So I don't think we should be showing favoritism here. I think we should just like make spaces for both and try to have communication channels where it's desired. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the other thing I was thinking is that like we also have to look holistically at exactly what those kinds of contributions are, like making space for us in their, in their catalogs, like ensuring that we have a presence that provides us with an opportunity to be close to our users. Like all those things also to me are very important. So participating in the the engineering dialogue is important, but it is also, I just want to make sure that I'm saying it out loud, that it's not necessarily the only way that I feel like they're contributing.
Yeah.
Sometimes they want your engineering in the process, though. Neil.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we are all participating in more ways than just the immediate moment. Like we have an orientation in the open source world that comes around. Okay, so we are very nearly at the top of the hour. If we're going to keep having interesting discussions like this without an agenda, I'm going to stop canceling the weeks where we don't have an agenda topic, because the last couple of weeks have been very engaging, at least for me. And yeah, David, go ahead.
Well, there was one more thing that I wanted to cover, because this does kind of dramatically change things. And I want to say like so at Amazon, the images that we publish are published as our community images first, and then there's a marketplace image that we can take advantage, that people can take advantage of if they want to use it. We're going to transition. We'll have to transition that off to a different marketplace account to continue to do this in a way that is consistent, where we can continue to publish those images with control.
Okay, so what do we need to do next?
I think we'll do that. I mean, we'll take care of all of that through standard process, right? Like we have a great process for that, and a community architect to discuss it with, and can be managed through council and through the tickets. And same thing on the CentOS side. We'll do it through council and tickets.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Sounds ideal to me.
Okay. Awesome.
As long as they get acted on. Okay. Everybody, thanks for the discussion today. Per usual, this will get published out in a few hours. I have some intro, outro stuff that's going to get auto-applied. So it could be terrible, or it could be no, it's probably going to be terrible. So it'll be fun in any case. Thanks again. I'll see y'all later.
Thanks.